And good afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Two Guys and a Bible here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. And I'm by myself this evening. I don't know if you can see Daniel or not, but he just simply getting me set up. Uh, but Daniel's not feeling good at all. And so, like I said, I think he's just making sure that I'm with you, but he's going to bow out because he's just not feeling well at all. And that's just fine. And so, let me see here. I'm trying to make sure that I'm on screen. Host disabled. Okay. So anyway, I'll do the very best that I can. Um, I can only see a small bit of the screen here with myself on it, but Daniel says it's set up. So, yeah, just got a text that says we're good to go. And that, pardon me, that is absolutely fantastic. So, hope you're having a great week so far. My week has started out, boy, oh boy, oh boy, hectically busy. I will say this. I'm going to make an appeal here. I need someone who is an expert in Microsoft or Adobe. Uh, Here's the deal. I have this manuscript, a very large manuscript written. It is entitled Resurrection Feast Fulfilled, a study of the relationship between the last feast day of Israel, Sukkot, and the resurrection. 458 pages plus indices. Okay. Now, please don't laugh too hard sitting out there in radio land where I cannot hear you. uh, I use my word processing program is Corel Word Perfect. Now, I know that the great majority of people out there believe that I am a dinosaur from the Mesozoic age or something like that. Because, you know, 9.5 out of 10 people use Microsoft Word. Well, I hate Microsoft Word. Absolutely hate it. One of the reasons being Microsoft Word hates large documents. So, anyway, here's the deal. I've got the document done. When I try to publish it to PDF, I am getting widows and orphans. I'm getting weird spacings. I'm getting some really weird stuff going on. And my good friend, Tom Klosky out of Arkansas, has been working with my document. He generated the indices, as a matter of fact. And he's been trying to figure out what in the world is going on with the PDF. Well, I discovered just this morning that my Corel had inserted some code into the manuscript that was causing some widows. Okay, so I've deleted that. I am still not able to convert to PDF or even to Microsoft Word. See, when I try to convert over to Microsoft Word from Corel, it will not do it. Oh, if I copy and paste 2 or 3 pages at a time, it will do it. It doesn't like it, but it will do it. And it still messes up the codes. It still messes up the formatting. And so it just creates tons and tons and tons of work. So if anyone out there is really, really proficient at Adobe, how to convert, how to edit, and see, I've got Adobe Pro that is supposed to allow me to edit. Okay, so this morning I did a conversion to PDF. It looked okay, except the widow and the orphan that I deleted, okay, that I got rid of, and the formatting looks okay. But I had to do the corrections in Corel, then convert it, And even though I have the pro version of Adobe that's supposed to allow me to edit, I'm not able to edit. I am a total loss. So if anyone is out there that is willing to take on a labor of love, okay, to do some voluntary work to help me get this book published, to get it into a final form that I can submit it to my publisher, please contact me through my website, send me an email, and let me know that you're willing to work with this. I am frustrated out of my mind because I've got this manuscript that I think is really, really good. I think it will help bring a tremendous amount of understanding concerning the resurrection, concerning the role of Israel in eschatology, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just sitting there, and I'm not able to get it published. So, like I said, if you are able to help me, then please contact me through my website. All right. So now then, all of that said, all right, all of that said, I want to thank you again for joining me here on what we call Two Guys in the Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. And I'm going to be talking this evening. I'm going to continue in Isaiah chapter 65. And remember, we are talking about the Messianic temple. And I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, many of you know that I have recently introduced a brand new book entitled, let me see, do I have a copy of it here on my desk? No, it's in my studio. Okay. It is entitled Temple to Telos. In that book, I set forth the premises that the Jerusalem temple of the first century, being ministered over by the Levitical priesthood, was standing for the fulfillment of the first four of Israel's feast days. My question, therefore, is why would that same temple not have to be standing for the fulfillment of the final three feast days? Now, I have said many times in YouTube discussions, there is not a 100% one-to-one correlation between the physical pardon me, the standing of the physical temple and the validity of the law. I point this out in my book, okay? And what I mean by that is, it's very obvious that the temple was destroyed in 586 BC, but the law continued to be valid. So again, there's not a one-to-one comparison or correlation between the physical standing of the temple and the fulfillment of the feast days. They are interrelated, however, as Hebrews chapter 9 makes abundantly clear. While the first tabernacle, meaning the temple, while the first tabernacle has standing, and it is from the Greek word stasin, having standing, having validity, still being bound, okay, it would continue to have validity until the time of Reformation. So anyway, I don't want to get too sidetracked on that, but this is an absolutely fantastic, absolutely fascinating, and absolutely critical subject. What has been absolutely mind-blowing to me is that one objector after another has said, I'm just absolutely crazy. One objector says, oh, the temple doesn't have any meaning at all. All that's necessary is a tent or a tabernacle that can be constructed in a couple of days. Here, and this same guy, this same objector, is looking forward to the building of a Jerusalem temple. He thinks that the Temple Institute in Jerusalem is preparing to build a divinely sanctioned physical temple, not a tabernacle, not a tent, a temple. Do you see the problem, folks? And by the way, many other objectors to my book are also people who are looking forward to a future temple. Yet over and over and over, they decry the value of temple. No, you don't have to have a temple for the fulfillment of the feast days. Those same people are saying we got to have a temple in the future. Why do we have to have a temple? Oh, to fulfill the feast days. And so it's just been absolutely astounding to read the objections and to listen to the objections of people trying to destroy the fact that the old law, the Levitical priesthood, and the tabernacle / temple would remain valid, standing, and binding until the fulfillment of the final 3 feast days. Now, since the old law has passed away, since the Levitical priesthood is no longer binding, since the temple is no longer standing, and the temple no longer has standing, then that means that either the final 3 feast days will never be fulfilled, or the law of Moses will be one day restored. But do you know what? Nobody teaches that the law of Moses will one day be restored. Okay, so if the law of Moses will not ever be restored, then that means that a future rebuilt temple cannot be the temple for the fulfillment of the final 3 feast days, which are based upon, drawn from, mandated by the law of Moses. Do you see the problem here? Now, all of this is related to the concept and to the doctrine of the Messianic temple. Because we are told over and over and over again by dispensationalists, we've got to have the Jerusalem temple. We have to have the red heifer to purify the priesthood, the utensils, and the temple. Based on Numbers chapter 19. Well, Numbers chapter 19, ladies and gentlemen, is the law of Moses. And yet dispensationalists say, Thomas Ice certainly teaches it, Wayne Price certainly taught it, Randall Price, excuse me. The law of Moses has been taken out of the way. Okay, if the law of Moses has been taken out of the way, then any necessity for the red heifer has been taken out of the way. If the law of Moses has been removed and annulled, then the final 3 feast days have either been fulfilled or they've been annulled. Well, they couldn't be annulled because the law of Moses could not pass away until it would be all fulfilled. Matthew 5:17 and 18. And so when we talk about this Messianic temple concept, there are so many problems with the dispensational view of the Messianic temple. And listen, even though Thomas Ice, for instance, says that the law of Moses has been fulfilled and forever taken out of the way, you know what he teaches? He teaches that after the rapture, when the man of sin signs a peace treaty with Israel and allows for the building of the temple in Jerusalem, guess what he says? The, quote, traditional, unquote, sacrifices of Judaism will be resumed and restored. Well, wait a minute. The traditional sacrifices of Judaism came strictly and solely and exclusively from the law of Moses, which Thomas Ice says has been fulfilled and forever annulled. How can you say that the traditional sacrificial system, i.e., the sacrificial system of the law of Moses, will be restored, and at the same time say, oh, wait, the law of Moses will never be restored? See the problem? Absolutely devastating issues and contradictions for the dispensational world. And yet over and over and over again, They talk to us about the necessity for a future, pardon me, physical temple. Well, if you're going to have a physical temple with the traditional Jewish sacrificial system restored, then guess what? You've got to restore the law of Moses. And I'll go over all of this in this new book of mine, Temple to Telos. If you really want to be challenged on this critical issue, then go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com. Go to my store, just look up the word Temple to Telos and order the book. Listen to me. This book will blow your mind. I have said from the moment it was published, this is a theological atom bomb. It is devastating. It is fatal to all futurist views of eschatology. And, back to subject, it is devastating to all futurist views of a messianic temple. Okay? That old covenant temple, that old covenant cultus, that old covenant priesthood, it would remain valid until the time of Reformation. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 9 and 10. What is the time of Reformation? What is the time of the restoration of all things? Acts chapter 3, 19 and following. Acts 3, the restoration of all things, is based upon the Greek word apokatastasis, and it means to put back in the proper condition. It's used in medical terms outside the Bible, to reset a bone. Well, that time of apokatastasis would be in the fulfillment of all things that all of the Old Testament prophets said were going to happen. From Moses, from Samuel, yea, all the prophets, all who have ever spoken. They foretold the apokatastasis. When would that come? Oh, at the coming of Christ, Acts chapter 3, 19 through 21. But wait a minute. The apokatastasis is the Reformation, the time of the Reformation. The deorthosis of Hebrews chapter 9, verse 10, that the law of Moses would be imposed until the time of Reformation. Once again, apokatastasis and deorthosis are direct synonyms. Now, remember, that old covenant temple with its cultus, with its feast days, with its priesthood, Levitical priesthood, that old covenant system would stand valid until the time of the Reformation, which is the time of the restoration, which is the time of the second coming. Folks, I've got to tell you, this whole concept of the Messianic temple has to take into consideration that the Old Covenant temple, the Old Covenant cultus, the Old Covenant priesthood would stand valid and imposed. That the word imposed in Hebrews chapter 9, verse 9 and 10 is from the Greek word epikaimai, and it means exactly what the word imposed means. Legally binding. So the writer of Hebrews is saying that those meats, drinks, and divers washings, which means the feast days, which means the priesthood, all of those things were imposed, would remain imposed, would remain valid until the time of the Reformation. Well, what's the time of Reformation? It's the time when man could enter into the most holy place, because as long as the old covenant system stood, as long as the old covenant system stood valid and imposed, there was no entrance into the most holy place. Do you begin to see a glimmer of how important it is to realize the significance of the fall of that Old Covenant temple that occurred in AD 70? Because, you see, immediately prior to that fall, immediately prior to that destruction, is when Hebrews was written, saying that the Old Covenant, with all of its services, with all of its instruments, with all of its typology, that Old Covenant temple, or covenant, excuse me, that Old Covenant system was nigh unto vanishing away. Nigh unto vanishing. And the word vanish there is from the Greek word aphonismu. Now, phanerao, which is kind of a family word, means to make visible, to make manifest, to appear, if you please. So, the negative, aphonismu, means no longer be there. It would disappear. It would vanish. This is critical. And the writer says that Old Covenant, now look, some people try to argue, well, yeah, what Hebrews chapter 8 is talking about is that the visible structure of the temple, the visible ordinances of the temple cultus, that was getting ready to vanish away, but the law itself had already passed away. The covenant had already passed away. Well, there's a massive, oh, pardon me. There's a massive, massive problem with that, ladies and gentlemen. Hebrews chapter 8, 6 and following uses the word covenant. It never uses the term instruments or cultus or sacrifices. Hebrews chapter 8, 8 to 13 uses the word covenant either explicitly or elliptically no less than 5 times. Do you catch the power of that? The Holy Spirit understood that people were going to distort, and may I use the term, pervert the concept of the passing of the law. And that's exactly what happens. People say, well, yeah, Hebrews chapter 8 is talking about the passing of the visible structure. But the law had already passed away at the cross. No, 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 no. It was the covenant that was nigh unto passing away, disappearing, vanishing. Now, once again, Hebrews chapter 9 is explicit. That cultus, that covenant would remain and have standing validity and be imposed until the time of Reformation, until the time of the fulfillment of all that the Old Covenant prophets had said. That's what Acts chapter 3, 19 and following teaches. All of the Old Testament prophets, yea, all who had ever spoken, foretold the time of restoration, the apokatastasis. The apokatastasis that would be consummated at the second coming. Well, what comes at the second coming, ladies and gentlemen? Well, dispensationalists say, well, at the second coming, the Messianic temple comes. But wait a minute. According to Hebrews chapter 9, the Old Covenant Mosaic temple would remain valid, binding, and imposed until that time of Reformation, which is the time of the apokatastasis, which is the time of the second coming. So when dispensationalists talk about, oh, well, we got to have the Messianic temple. According to Hebrews chapter 8 and Hebrews chapter 9, along with Acts chapter 3, the Old Covenant law of Moses temple would stand binding, imposed until the time of the deorthosis, the Reformation. The time of the deorthosis is the time of the Messianic temple. So if you put the Messianic temple off into our future, okay, and some future second coming of Christ, then what are you doing? You are saying, in accordance with Hebrews chapter 9, that the Old Covenant temple, the Old Covenant cultus, is still valid and binding today. Does it need to be restored? It's still binding. But wait a minute, there's a problem with this, ladies and gentlemen. Well, no, I'm sorry. I phrased that wrong. There are whole lots of problems with that. You can't build a temple in Jerusalem because of the Dome of the Rock. You cannot have any genealogically confirmed Levitical priest to administer any kind of a temple service, to offer up any kind of animal sacrifices, because you don't have a red heifer. And somebody say, oh, no. There were recently 5 red heifers shipped over there. You just stand back and watch, okay? Just stand back and watch. This has been going on forever, ladies and gentlemen. I remember in the 1960s, oh, they've got a red heifer. They've got a red heifer. Disqualified. In the 1970s, oh, a red heifer's been born. Disqualified. 80s, 90s, 2000. Red heifer's been born. Disqualified. So just stand back and watch. They still won't have, and still don't have, a properly qualified red heifer. And even if they were to find in the midst of one of these 5, or in the year 3035, if they are to find a 100% red heifer, it wouldn't matter, because the law of Moses has been forever removed. You see the problems? Now, how does this correlate with Isaiah chapter 65 that we began looking at last week? Well, it correlates perfectly, because you see, according to the scripture, the new creation comes at the time of the second coming. The second coming is the time of the apokatastasis. The apokatastasis is the time of the second coming. That's the time of the new creation. The new creation is the time. Now, look, let me back up here and let me make a clarifying point. Dispensationalists disagree with what I'm about to say. Dispensationalists say you have the rapture, 7-year tribulation, well, 3.5 years of peace, 3.5 years of tribulation, followed by the second coming, followed by the millennium, and then at the end of the millennium, you have the new heaven and new earth of 2 Peter 3 and Revelation chapter 21. Well, I'm sorry, that's a convoluted and a false view. The coming of the Lord, the day of the Lord, is the second coming of Christ, and it is to bring in the new creation. The entire rapture doctrine, ladies and gentlemen, and I say this with all due respect, I mean no disrespect, I mean no unkindness whatsoever. The doctrine of the rapture is false. Okay? By the way, I mentioned my book. I'm going to do something here, okay? If you will go to my website and if you'll order the book, Temple to Tell Us, here's what I'm going to do. Very special offer. Just now thought of it. Hadn't planned on doing this. Spur of the moment. You order the book, Temple to Tell Us, and I will include, totally free of charge, my book, leaving the rapture behind. Okay? How's that for a special deal? Totally impromptu, totally unplanned. Okay, but here's what you've got to do. If you order the book Temple to Telos and you want to take advantage of this impromptu offer, you've absolutely got to send me a note, send me an email, send a note with the order of Temple to Telos that says, "Hey Don, I saw your special offer of Temple to Telos and Rapture book on Two Guys and a Bible." Okay? If you don't send me a note, I will not include leaving the rapture behind because I won't know that you're taking advantage of the special offer. So, special offer, Temple to Telos, free copy, leaving the rapture behind. Great deal. All right, now then, to continue. So, the second coming of Christ brings in the new creation. What is Isaiah 65 all about? And don't forget, the second coming of Christ is the time of the apokatastasis, which is the time of the Reformation. The time of the Reformation is the time of the new messianic kingdom / temple. You see these connections here? I say this all the time. I absolutely love to connect the dots. When we are able to see these thematic connections throughout scriptures and to see how these Old Testament prophecies serve as the fountain, the spring from which these marvelous New Testament prophecies are flowing. I tell you what, folks, every time I see these connections and I see new connections, and I see new connections all the time, I really do. And it's the joy of learning from the Word of God. Okay? But when I see these connections and I discover new connections, it's thrilling to me. I hope it is to you. And so, in Isaiah 65, and last week we began to go over this and we didn't get started an awful lot. So I just simply want to reintroduce the subject of Isaiah 65. Now, where we're going is obviously the new creation. And where we're going is Isaiah 65:25. The wolf and the lamb shall lie down together. A child shall play, with a poisonous snake, Isaiah chapter 11. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all of my holy mountain. That's the messianic temple. Okay? God's holy mountain is the messianic temple mountain. Don't ever lose sight of that. Okay? That is absolutely critical. So that's where we're headed. But in the meantime, last week I shared with you Isaiah chapter 65, 1 and 2 is quoted by Paul verbatim in Romans 10, 20 and 21. To speak of, number one, Israel's rejection of the gospel. Number two, justification for his Gentile mission. Then, Isaiah chapter 65, the Lord says, as one says of the new wine that is in the cluster, do not destroy it because there is a blessing in it. Even so shall I save a remnant. Even so a remnant shall be saved in the Valley of Achor. Valley of Achor is a fascinating subject. Anyway, here is the Lord promising in the context, as we shall see as we progress, in the context of the promise of the new creation, of the mountain of the Lord, the messianic temple. Here is the Lord promising that at that time, at the time of the new creation, a remnant would be saved. Now look, Isaiah is just rife. I mean, passage after passage after passage in the book of Isaiah speaks of the salvation of only a remnant. Isaiah 1, Isaiah 10, Isaiah 22, Isaiah 43, on and on and on. I mean, just it's everywhere. That's one of the reasons why, ladies and gentlemen, it is wrong to see in Romans chapter 11, 25 to 27, when Paul says, and so all Israel shall be saved, it's wrong to see there the concept and the idea that it's some future coming of the Lord. That's false. That all Israel, past, present, and future, all Israel will be saved. God never, ever, ever promised to save all Israel. One author by the name, oh my goodness, I just left his name. Oop, it just left. He wrote a book, it's about that thick, entitled Survivors of Israel, Survivors in Israel. He does a marvelous job of pointing out any concept, any idea that God would ever promise to save all of Israel flies in the face of the dominant and the predominant doctrine of the salvation of the remnant. Okay? In Isaiah 27 and in Isaiah 59, the two Old Testament prophecies, the two dominant Old Testament prophecies that Paul is drawing from in Romans 11, 25 to 27, as all scholars agree, along with Daniel chapter 9. Okay. I mean, after all, Paul in Romans chapter 11 says, this is my covenant with them when I take away their sin. That's Isaiah 27, 9 and following, but it's also Daniel 9, 24. 70 weeks are determined to take away sin. Okay? That's Israel's sin. So Isaiah 27 and Isaiah 59, both of them, in their context, salvation of a remnant. And so here is Paul in Romans 11, 25 to 27, speaking about the salvation of, quote, all Israel. And yet at the same time, he is quoting from Old Testament prophecies which foretold the salvation of the righteous remnant. So what does that mean? Well, it means either Paul had a change of mind and he decided to reject the united testimony of the entirety of the Old Testament, which foretold the salvation of the remnant at the coming of the Lord. And Paul says, you know what? I'm rejecting that entire testimony, and I'm going to teach that all Israel, past, present, and future, all Israel is going to be saved. Or what he meant by all Israel was that all of the remnant would be saved, which agrees perfectly, by the way, with Romans chapter 9, where Paul discusses the salvation of the remnant. And he made a promise. Let me read that promise to you over here in Romans chapter 9. Are there certain scriptures that you have trouble memorizing? Sometimes, in fact, I was sharing this with somebody the other day at the post office. There are times, even to this day, when I'm not any longer a young chicken, a young chick. Okay. But there are certain passages I can read a couple of different times, and I've got it memorized. There are other passages that I have tried, and I've tried, and I've tried, and I've tried to memorize, and I can get them down for a brief period of time, and then the very next time that I try to quote them, it's like, let me see, what was that? What was that? What was that? I don't know. Romans 9:28 is one of them. I know the gist of it. But the Lord is talking about the salvation of the remnant. The salvation of the remnant that was already underway when Paul wrote, because Paul in Romans chapter 11 continues his discussion of the salvation of the remnant. And he said, I'm one of them. I'm of the tribe of Benjamin. And he even says, except the Lord of Sabaoth had left us, back here in Romans chapter 9, except the Lord of Sabaoth had left us a remnant, we would all perish. So speaking of that ongoing salvation of the remnant, The remnant that was obeying the gospel as the gospel was being preached to all of Israel and all of the world. Paul said this. I'm going to start with verse 27. Isaiah also cries out concerning Israel. Though the number of the children of Israel be as the sand of the sea and as the stars, the remnant will be saved. Do you see what Paul's saying? Paul is saying it certainly may be true that the number of Israel is vast. That was true in Isaiah's day. It was true in Paul's day. What was true in Isaiah's day was, even though the children of Israel be as the sand of the sea, a remnant shall be saved. And Paul quotes that to apply it to Israel of his day. Do you see what I mean when I say it's wrong in Romans chapter 11 to say, well, Paul was affirming the salvation of all Israel, past, present, and future? Did he affirm that after saying what he did in Romans chapter 9? Though the children of Israel be as the sand of the sea, or as the stars of the heavens, yet a remnant shall be saved. Was Paul confused? Did he contradict himself? No. All Israel that would be saved would be all of the remnant. So he says, let me start there again. Though the children of Israel be as the number, as the sand of the sea, a remnant will be saved, for he, that is Yahweh, will finish the work. What work? Salvation of the remnant. He will finish the work, cut it short in righteousness, because the Lord will make a short work upon the earth. Okay, here's Paul writing at the time that the remnant was being saved by accepting the gospel. He says in Romans chapter 11, verse 7, Israel, that's the corporate body, has not received that which he sought, but the remnant, or excuse me, the elect has. Well, what was it that Israel was seeking? Well, Romans chapter 9 and 10, chapter 10 especially, verse 1 and following. Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. For I bear them record to God that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. For they, being ignorant of the righteousness which is of God, and going about to establish their own righteousness, has not submitted themselves unto the righteousness which is of God by faith. What was it that Israel sought? Well, Romans chapter 9, the last few chapters, it was righteousness. They did not attain it because they did not attain it by, go after it, seek to attain it by faith, but by works. And so here is Paul, once again, discussing the salvation of the remnant. That was what Israel sought. But guess what? Israel also sought the kingdom. Israel also sought the new creation. Israel also sought the messianic temple. But those things were to be achieved, just like righteousness, by faith. And did you notice? Israel has not attained that for which he sought, but the elect has attained it. Now, folks, if what Israel desired, and it was, if what Israel desired was restoration to the land in full autonomy, full independence, restoration of the Jewish temple, restoration of a purified Levitical priesthood, restoration of a purified sacrificial system, and the realization of her eschatological hopes. If that was what Israel was hoping for on a nationalistic, physical level, and make no mistake, that's what Israel as a whole wanted. There's no question about what Israel wanted. but it's not what Jesus was promising. Jesus nowhere spoke of a restoration to the physical land. He nowhere spoke of the restoration of a physical temple. He spoke nowhere of a restoration of a purified Levitical priesthood. He spoke nowhere of a purified cultic sacrificial animal sacrificial system. Nowhere. Paul never promised those things either. And consider this. If a literal physical messianic temple is what Israel was longing for, then Paul said Israel has not attained that for which he sought, but but the elect has attained it. Oh, did the elect have their own special physical temple in Jerusalem? You see, you cannot identify Israel's hope as physical, material, land-based, geocentric, and have the elect attaining it. It doesn't work. That applies to the Messianic temple. So this salvation of the elect, the salvation of the remnant promised in Isaiah chapter 65 and verse 8, takes on an incredible significance in the context of the discussion of the Messianic temple. Let me reiterate what I just said. You cannot have the hope of Israel to be a restoration of the physical land, restoration of the physical city of Jerusalem, restoration of the physical temple, restoration of the physical Levitical priesthood, restoration of a purified animal sacrificial system. Okay, now listen to me again. We know historically that's what Israel as a body wanted. Okay? The great question is that what Jesus and his apostles were promising? Well, let's see here. In John chapter 6, the famous story of the feeding of 5,000 men with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, the gathering up of 12 baskets. When the Jews saw what Jesus had done, I mean, look, use your imagination. 5,000 men, and that's men, doesn't count the women, doesn't count the children. And the apostles come to Jesus and they say, Lord, you know, the people are they're perishing, they're dying, they're going to die of hunger. You know, you have to understand, ladies and gentlemen, they didn't have McDonald's to go to, or Arby's, or whatever. Most people back then ate one large meal a day. They might have, you know, a little piece of bread or something to carry with them in the field to work with, to feed on later, but they didn't eat like you and I do. That's why their average size, by the way, was about 5'5", 5'7". Average weight, 130, 140, maybe. They didn't eat. So think of the impact on that audience. Jesus has just fed 5,000 men. There was probably an audience there that day, let's just say conservatively, of 9,000 people. And Jesus fed them with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Now, if you are a good, faithful Jew, a zealot, a would-be revolutionary of the day, you have to know that one of the greatest challenges to any military conflict is logistics. It's food. So if you're thinking about revolting against Rome, what do you need? You need food. And here's the guy right there that just fed 5,000 men 9,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Just think what he could do if he had more to work with. Have you ever thought about those? I mean, and see, Luke's account of that story is that Jesus had them arranged and seated in what, if you were to pass by, it would look like a military encampment. That was suggestive to the zealots, to the would-be revolutionaries. So they were all excited. They were enthused. They started coming for Jesus. But John chapter 6, verse 15 says, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come to make him king, he withdrew himself. Now, wait a minute. You know, in 2012, I had a formal public debate with Joel McDermott. He's post-millennial reconstructionist. And Joel said the time for the kingdom was not in the first century. And so I brought up John chapter 6:15. I said, why did Jesus withdraw himself? If Jesus came to establish a literal physical kingdom, and let's phrase this in the context of the Messianic temple. If Jesus came to purify the Jerusalem temple, or if he came to build a Messianic temple, which Zechariah 6, 12, and 13 says the Messiah would do, okay, then when they were about to come to make him their king and their temple builder, why did he withdraw? And you know what Joel McDermott said? Well, the time wasn't right. What? What? Jesus himself said, the time is fulfilled, which means the appointed time has come. The kingdom of heaven has drawn near. So Joel McDermott had said, yes, he's looking for an earthly, physical kingdom. Well, that's what the Jews wanted. They came to try to make him their king. Jesus withdrew. Listen to me. That means that Jesus didn't want anything to do with a literal, physical, messianic temple. Because temple and kingdom, you see, go hand in hand. You can't separate them. Matter of fact, John Stevenson, is that the right name? Excuse me, Gregory Stevenson. I don't know if you can read that or not. Anyway, Gregory Stevenson, really, really great book in many ways. Typical liberal scholar in other ways. And that is, Jesus was wrong in his eschatological expectation, et cetera, et cetera. Nonetheless, Gregory Stephen makes the comment that the Jerusalem temple meant more to the ancient Jews than life itself. Let me see if I can find this quote. To the nationalists, that's the people who came to try to make Jesus their king. Okay? In times of national crisis, such as the Maccabean War and the war with Rome, temple and national identity were mutually inclusive. In the eyes of the nationalists, and once again, that's the people that wanted to come and make Jesus their king, and Jesus rejected them. In the times of, in the eyes of the nationalists, the temple embodied the very hope of freedom and the establishment of an independent Jewish state. You see, folks, this is what the Jews of the first century wanted. It is not what Jesus offered. Now ask yourself the question, okay, if the Jews wanted a king, and they did, if they wanted an independent kingdom, and they did, if they wanted the restoration of the geopolitical Davidic kingdom, and they did, and if Jesus came to establish a geopolitical, militaristic, Davidic kingdom to restore that kind of kingdom, okay, if this is what the Jews wanted, and if this is what Jesus came to offer, then why was it that when the Jews offered him that kind of a kingdom, he rejected them? Why is it then that Jesus, when he offered the kind of kingdom that he was offering, they rejected him? If they both wanted the same kind of kingdom, i.e., nationalistic, militaristic, theocratic, geopolitical kingdom, if that's the kind of kingdom they both wanted, why did they both reject each other? Now, once again, ladies and gentlemen, this involves temple. You cannot separate temple from kingdom, as Gregory Stevenson takes note in his book there, the quote that I just shared with you. When Jesus rejected the offer of being king in John 6:15, he was thereby rejecting the concept of a literal, physical, messianic temple. And that was the majority, that was the bulk of Israel that rejected Jesus's offer. They did not want the kind of kingdom that he was offering. Now ask yourself the question, why? Why did Jesus reject their offer of the kingdom? Well, the answer goes back to 1 Samuel chapter 8. The leaders of Israel came to Samuel and said, make us a king over us that we might be like the nations around us. And Samuel was extremely grieved, went into depression and mourning. And the Lord appeared to him and said, Samuel, this is not about you. They've not rejected you. They have rejected me from being king over them. Now, you've absolutely got to catch the power of this. God told Samuel to anoint Saul. All the time understanding and knowing it was a rejection of his sovereignty to have a literal physical king on a physical throne over that militaristic, nationalistic kingdom. Okay. In 1 Samuel chapter 10, Samuel comes before the people and he tells them, to paraphrase, put this in good old Oklahoma language, you guys better think about this, because your desire for a physical kingdom with a physical king is a great sin against God. And you know what? They acknowledge that. Now watch this. In 1 Samuel chapter 12, 16 and following, Samuel gathered the people together to anoint the king, but he reminded them once again, you have committed a great sin against the Lord in demanding and commanding and desiring a king to rule over you. And you know what the people said? You're right. We have sinned against the Lord in desiring a king over us. Look, ladies and gentlemen, from the very beginning, God never wanted Israel to be ruled over with a literal physical king in a literal physical geocentric kingdom. That was only temporary. It was not his ultimate game. And thus the idea of dispensationalists to restore that kind of nationalistic, geopolitical, militaristic kingdom is a restoration of the great sin against Yahweh. The desire for a physical messianic kingdom is the same thing. And you know what? I'm out of time. Hey, thank you for joining me this evening on Two Guys in a Bible here on Fulfilled Radio. And there's Daniel. Hope your headache is better, Daniel. Good, good, good. So, all right. Well, thanks again, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. And with that, I'm going to say good night and God bless. I'm going to go eat some spaghetti.